Hey, welcome back to the channel. Today is February the 5th, and we'll be going through Exodus chapters 19 through 21. But let's take a look back and just see what we've covered so far. In chapters 1 through 12, Israel was still in Egypt. Moses was dealing with Pharaoh's hardened heart, had to use 10 plagues, and all those plagues were an assault on the Egyptian gods. But in case you missed it, if you go back to February 1st and February 2nd videos, there's a link in those descriptions that takes you to another video that shows you how each of the plagues was a direct assault on Egypt's gods. Check that out. And in chapter 13 through 18, we have the journey to Sinai. This is where they've left Egypt. They've gone through the Red Sea. God's provided food and water for them and protected them in a time of war with the Amalekites. Which brings us to chapter 19 through 40. We're camped around Mount Sinai now, the mountain of God. It's taken them 3 months to get to this point from the time that they left Egypt. And in chapter 19, God calls to Moses. He says, I want you to remind the people and the elders what I've done for them. I've borne them up on eagle's wings, and I brought them to myself. God's not sharing credit with anybody for what's happened. It's all him. He restates the terms of his covenant to Israel. And he says, if you obey and keep my commandments, then you'll be my possession and you'll be a kingdom of priests, basically a holy nation set apart. And so when the people hear this is the first time you'll hear this term, and if you watch for it, it's repeated. They say, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. God gives a sign to the people specifically so that they'll believe that Moses is the one that he's speaking through. And he says, I'm going to appear to Moses and speak to him from a cloud so that all the people will see it and all the people will hear us talking together. Okay. So God commands Moses, to consecrate the people. Basically, they're to wash their clothes, cleanse themselves, and they're to abstain from anything that might defile them because they're preparing to meet their holy God. But he also warns Moses, you need to set a boundary around the mountain because anybody that crosses that boundary, they're not to touch God himself. And crossing that deadline would be resulting in death for either man or beast. And so on the third day, foreshadowing 3 days, God appears as thunder, lightning, a thick cloud, and smoke like from a furnace. He's really making himself known even with a loud trumpet that keeps getting louder and louder and louder. He's making sure that they notice that this is not just some strange occurrence. This is God himself. So Moses goes up to speak with God, but as soon as he gets up there, God sends him right back down again. And he says, go warn the people not to come up here. And I can only assume that some of them were getting antsy and trying to, like we do when we're at an event, trying to see who the celebrity is or whatever. And I think God really saving their lives here by sending Moses back. He says, by the way, when you come back, bring Aaron with you. Now, why is that significant? Well, there's a couple of reasons. Aaron is the first in the line of Levitical priests that will establish the routine in the tabernacle to come, he and his sons, and it will evolve from there. And also, he's going to hear everything that God tells Moses. And it's oddly enough, in the Hebrew tradition, how many people does it take to establish a fact? 2 witnesses. So Moses and Aaron hear what the Lord says, and they hear it at the same time. Spoiler alert, Aaron succumbs to peer pressure later on in chapter 32, and he seems to forget all about this when he's pressured into making an idol for the children of Israel to worship. But that's another story for another day. But we're not like that, are we? We're just like that. How soon we forget. Anyway, we get to chapter 20, and God delivers his commandments and his ordinances to the people through Moses. Now, of course, we're all familiar with the Big Ten, the 10 Commandments. These are God's absolutes. There's no ambiguity, and they're not without serious consequences. And any violation of them means we have separation from God. But I'll challenge you. Can any of you recite the 10 Commandments from memory? It's really, if it's that important to God, it should be that important to us. So I'm going to commit that to be something that I learn and make sure I can recite from memory. But anyway, the first 4 commandments that we see in these 10 deal with our relationship between man and God and how we are to revere and worship him through these commandments. And then the 5 through 10, those commandments deal with more relationship of man to man and how we're to behave towards one another. Out of those basic 6, pretty much comes the foundation of our social order that we deal with today. If we were able to keep the 10 commandments and live sinless lives, then the fellowship that Adam enjoyed with God before the fall could be restored. But we all know that's just not the case because of sin. Chapter 21 begins with God's ordinances. And what does it mean by the term ordinance? Well, think of it this way. The 10 Commandments were God's laws applicable to all men, everywhere, all the time. Ordinances, or statutes as sometimes they're referred to, are laws specifically for the people of the nation of Israel. Okay, think of it this way. Our state legislature passes laws that everybody who resides in our state has to abide by. But then you have cities and towns that pass rules and laws that apply to the people that reside in that city or town, or people visiting there that are separate from what the state passes. They're equally imposed upon us. Some may be more severe than others. But the laws that are in our town don't apply to somebody in another town necessarily. They may be similar, but they can be uniquely different too. And this is because this nation is being set apart from all the other nations, and they're going to have their own set of guidelines and rules that they have to follow. Remember also that Jethro had given some advice to Moses about finding judges to help him to rule over the people. Well, these ordinances that are given are going to become the basis about which they can do their jobs and preside over the people. And that's pretty much where we're going to end up today. So thanks for joining this afternoon, this morning, tonight, whatever time you're watching. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you tomorrow.